Welcome, everyone. We are joined today by Mark Rozner. He is a project management leader with over 20 years of experience delivering high visibility initiatives across healthcare, finance, enterprise tech. He has literally lived through the evolution that every PM faces. So from managing tasks to shaping strategy to becoming a trusted business advocate, building and leading PMOs. And we really want to break that down today and talk about how we can navigate those different aspects to go from tactical to strategic, help you all build your visibility and your strategic partnership or mindset, so to speak. So that's what we're going to talk. That's what we're going to talk to Mark about today. So, Mark, welcome. I thank you for joining us today. I'd love to hear a little bit about you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and after chatting with the two of you for a while now, and in a couple of different venues, I'm excited to further this conversation with y'all. So, as you said, longtime project manager. We say 20 years, over 20 years. It was probably closer to 40. It's been really a great experience to have gone from being a subject matter expert in healthcare, thanks to the United States Air Force, to doing cancer research and financial research and doing a lot of things. Eventually married my passion for healthcare and my background in computer science, and found myself in customer service, and ultimately, long story short, into implementation management, which is what a lot of project managers were called back in the day, because that's all they brought us in to do was bring in, here's your software, turn the knob, and get it going. To the point of really being a project manager, senior project manager, and in my last full-time engagement, had moved into being the director of a project management services group.
So that's great. That's quite a ambitious career path. Not very many people are going to go from a junior project manager all the way to a PMO director. What I'd like to kind of start us off with this conversation is, Mark, from your, let's call it, eclectic career.
I call it Jabberwocky.
Jabberwocky's good too. What would you say is one of the most pivotal moments in how you came to be a PMO director?
Absolutely. I think the biggest realization, and probably one of the first hurdles to get over, is to go from subject matter expert, or SME as I like to call it, not the character, and really say, do I have strong enough project management skills to compensate for not being the smartest person in the room anymore? And that was really a turning point of being able to say, yeah, I can be a project manager. I can lead efforts. I can do change management and risk management well enough to not only not be the subject matter expert, but even change industries along the way, which was also a very hard thing for me to do and trust myself. Impostor syndrome is a real thing. And project managers I've talked to for years have said that's one of their biggest things, is they just don't feel like they should be in that role for some reason.
Sure. And so I think I've seen a few posts from you that talk about how the way that you look at project management, specifically that executioner transition from executioner to strategic, has to do with simple activities such as how you actually close a project, how you view a project, how you start a project. And one of the things that stood out to me was the first time that you kind of did an audit. You were told that a project was being closed, and afterwards you started to ask some questions. So if you can kind of set the stage for us here, this will kind of drive the conversations towards those 6 elements that we talked about.
Sure. one of the major truths of project management and good project leadership is start with the end in mind. Where are you supposed to be when this is all said and done? And an installed system is not a success criteria. Installed system is a milestone. And so we talked about a little bit about being a PMO director, and in that role, I had actually started in the organization as a senior PM, moved into being the PM manager before I became the PMO director. And as I took the manager role on officially, I started sitting in on meetings with the other PMs on the team, and sat down in a closure meeting with one of my team members. And it was myself and the sponsor, and we were going through the normal process that they had been going through. And the sponsor was amazingly complimentary about the PM's ability to get tasks done. Just thought it was great. And I just sat there and listened. And he went through his thing, didn't interrupt him. When it was all said and done, I asked a couple of real basic questions. I said, where's the charter? Have you reviewed it? And what were the success criteria? And the success criteria was implement a system and hire someone to use it, because they were bringing one of the services for that department in-house instead of a third party. And when they said, yep, we got it installed and we have a person in place and it's live and everything's great, and we're turning it over to support. And I said, how's it going? What was the reason you needed a new system? Oh, because our service vendor was terrible. We just had really bad results. I said, what are the metrics looking like now? Oh, it's worse. That was the turning point in that meeting. Turned out the success criteria in the initial charter had been exactly as was stated. Implement system, hire person to run it. During the project, there had been meetings where they discussed what really needed to happen, which was affecting their service level and having things work. More conversation happened, found that not only did they not follow the success criteria, that they started living in the background. The software was still very buggy. In fact, the PM was actually doing bug management, was actually doing the management. I was like, I said, if that part alone, you're not done. But the fact that you have a lower service level than what you walked into with the system you're replacing, we are not in a close. We are in a replanning session at this point. And it was very difficult conversation to have with the PM and the sponsor.
So let's unpack this a little bit, because I think there's a couple of things that you have shed light on. The first thing is, for you to become a strategic project manager, to go from tactical to strategic, we know we need to understand what that success criteria is, right? We need to be able to drive the business forward, speak to the business advocacy. But the very first thing you mentioned, the success criteria they documented is not the success criteria of a project that drives a company forward, right? So
Correct.
we need to go back to, why do we do these projects? That's so crucial for project managers to understand that why piece. For us to ever get out of tactical, we need to at least understand what the purpose of it is. So how did you address that? And what insight can you give the audience on what should success criteria even look like to get a PM then started to become strategic?
Yeah, and this is where I think the PM craft really needs to be taken even more seriously than it sometimes does, because a lot of times PMs don't get brought in and until literally, a third party vendor is on their way, the contract's already been signed, all of that stuff's been done, business case is approved, budget's been set, everything's done, and the PM is literally given marching orders to make it happen.
Right.
And having not had any discussions about what they were trying to do. So one of the other projects I worked on in the same organization, in fact, when I was the senior PM for it, I walked in day one, they'd already selected a product. They had no requirements. They had no success criteria, none of those things. So my process is immediately to go back, pull the sponsor aside and do a visioning and say, it's 2 years from now. What has changed? Because again, projects are not just start, stop, and stuff in the middle. Projects are change. What change are you expecting to see in the future when we're all said and done? And can you properly state that to me? Because if it's not clear, we need to work on that. We need to maybe bring other folks in. Maybe there's dependencies that we need to talk about. Maybe there's some precursors that have to happen.
So let's, Justin, do you want to go?
I want to piggyback off of what E said earlier, which is success criteria and tying it to business outcomes. And I think this gets to the heart of what we've been talking about for quite some time, which is a project has to deliver some sort of value, whether it's an increase in revenue, a reduction in costs, a reduction in liability, or some sort of compliance piece. What sort of language would you make sure that you're looking for, Mark, when you're trying to write the success criteria for a project charter?
Sure. A lot of times I actually have to do a little education, because when we talk about success criteria, people immediately want to go to a metric. They just want to jump to a KPI or an OKR, which is great, but it doesn't always capture what you need. As an example, again, I'm coming from a lot of healthcare. A lot of the healthcare projects I've worked on, the results don't happen until the project's over. So you do not have measurable information that is needed. Certainly not subjective, or excuse me, not subjective, objective data. It may be 3, 6, 9 months, a year before you actually have proper objective data. So we really talk about, okay, what is it? What signs are you seeing? So as an example, we may implement a new system with a specific goal. Results aren't going to be found until afterwards. So we may look for things that are what I would call a proxy success criteria. People using the system, adoption. People not using the old system. People not going back to a piece of paper. And I have had projects where they went live with something. The users did not like what they had. They had manual forms in a desk drawer and went to the Xerox and printed off 1,000 copies and ran it around the hospital. Because again, there was no adoption. The change management wasn't in place during that implementation. It really is looking at it much more holistically. It's a lot of saying again, and when I say vision, it's truly a picture. I will go in with a sponsor or steering committee or whoever is leading this and say, draw me the picture. Let's go into a room and draw a picture and say what it is. Oh yeah, we see patients coming in and they're not queued up in our emergency room. They're able to actually log in from home and say, I'm on my way in, pull my record, this is what's going on. Oh, okay, we can do that. It's really, again, that's not a requirement. That's a vision. That's a picture of what they're wanting to do. So looking at it, go ahead.
Sorry, I want to get back to the question at hand and then jump into a different section. So when we're talking about success criteria, so it's understanding the vision. But if we use the example of what you mentioned, okay, of implement a system was what they had as a metric, right? If we think about what a success metric really should be, they're implementing the system for a reason. Maybe it's lower cost. Maybe it's going to be faster and require less resources, which means it'll help increase operational efficiency and revenue, right?
Right.
So when you think about success criteria like that, we have to think, so because we have to think of terms of business impacts. It's not just getting the leaders to understand that. We have to understand that. So if we understand that the objective is drive operational efficiency through this system by 10%, remove labor by 5%, so we're saving XYZ costs, okay? You talked about being in a steerco room and how you communicate things, right? So I want to
Right.
take us that direction, which is now we know the business impact of the example we're using, right? Let's pretend we're in the middle of the project, right? And we're starting to have to report on things. We're starting to have to think about the big picture when we plan. I want to start thinking, I want to start understanding how you approach that when you're in meetings, and we can start with planning and then get to steer code meetings of how you communicate trade-offs and stuff. But starting even with planning, we need to understand the impact to the programs. We need to understand the impact to all of the dependencies we have. So how do you even start as a project manager? Again, we know there's some tactical in there, but for us to move to strategic, what are some of the things you do to deep dive and step out to, into the big picture to start driving this forward?
It's a lot of discussions. Really, when it's, communication is the key piece. It's sitting down and listening to what the needs actually were. Quickly, you all love my stories here. I'll do a quick one. Was contracted into a very large healthcare system. They had requested $10 million to do a program, and had been denied several years in a row. And I was like, what failed? We don't know. That's why you're here. We've never gotten approved for it. We need you to get us approved for this $10 million. After discussing with the various key individuals, including the steering committee folks, I found that nobody in the world there was going to spend $10 million to do this. No one ever asked that question. They didn't care how bad the problem was they were trying to solve for. I said, let's go to a smaller piece. What is it that you want to do? What quick wins do we want to try and get in? And how can we schedule those incremental changes that we can measure and align that with meeting with you every 30 days or 60 days or 90 days? So we actually drew up a calendar that the steering committee, the people that had the money, we would talk to them initially every month and show them what we had accomplished and what we plan on doing in the next period. They felt comfortable after 3 months of this to say, what is it going to take for the first year? I said, we can do the first year of this program in $2 million. You got it. Right? We built the trust, right? It was getting their vision, getting the communication. Part of that was meeting with other project teams and finding out what the dependencies were. I actually drew a picture, what I call in and out of the frame, where I had a list of all the things that I believe were within the scope of our project, those things that were definitely outside that people have been talking about and trying to push into our project. And then there were other things where other efforts that were going on concurrent with ours, there was going to be some kind of impact or dependency as was needed. And so we drew this picture. And so one of my monthly meetings with Steerco was to validate that in and out of the frame scope. And again, the look on the face of these C-suite folks was, no one has ever brought this kind of information to us before. No one has looked at it so holistically. They just want to do their piece. So that's really my thing is, we're all human beings, right? No matter what our titles are, we all bring something to a table. The question is, are people listening to you? Are you talking to the right people? Are you getting the right information? And have you validated it? Because again, the biggest problem with that project was no one ever validated that $10 million was never going to happen. I mean, that was a basic decision that the business case should have called out.
Sure. And
Yeah.
that
So,
makes sense. And I see that you flashed a question here. We'll
mhm,
tackle this first, and then I want to kind of unpack everything that Mark said.
yep.
Because you talked about scope for a second, and this
Yep.
gets back to the project charter, which we talked about um, exit criteria, success factors, business outcomes. Now,
Yep.
here from Mohammed Azmul Haq, he has a question around how to handle scope creep after the agreed upon project charter. And then I will unpack the rest of what we talked about.
Yeah. And that gets into trade offs too and everything. So,
Yes. So I don't like the term scope creep.
okay.
I'll tell you why.
I know why.
I don't. I want to hear this. Let's hear it. Why don't you like scope creep?
It's not creep. It's not captured. It's not managed, and it's not there. There's nothing there to deal with it. It's not creep. There are, project plans are good the day you print them.
Uh-huh.
Things happen the day after that.
Right.
So things are going
Yes.
to change. Scope is going to change. Risks are going to change. Issues are going to come up. There's so many things that can happen. So to call it, just kind of bunch it up into scope creep, I think kind of gives it a bit of a disservice. It's
Okay.
really change that needs to be communicated, managed, and then controlled.
Now, hold on, Mark, because some scope, the concept of scope creep has a negative connotation. I agree with you. It's
Yeah.
not all scope creep is bad.
It's
And
bad.
this gets to the point that some, let's say, more novice or early project managers don't understand is projects are built on a base of assumptions. That's how you
Yes.
build a project charter. That's how you get it approved. And assumptions change, is what you're saying. And that's managing through the risks and issue management and the discoveries that happen. So that's why there is that dichotomy between good scope creep and bad scope creep. So can we unpack that a little bit more, and then we can talk about the trade-offs that you was talking
Yeah.
about? Because good scope creep,
Yeah.
the concept is that it helps towards the value that we've defined for a project. Bad scope creep is noise. And then I'll kick it off to you to expand on that.
Yeah. One of the things that I always implement in a project, pretty much of any size. In fact, as a PMO leader, I create a standard for what I call a decision management framework. And it is an agreed upon document. Again, I create it for the PMO for the entire enterprise, but then some projects need to have their own framework, their own validation. And it calls out, how are you going to manage risk? How are you going to capture risk? How are you going to report risk? What are you going to do with issues? What's the escalation path? What is the criteria for budget changes? If it's $10 difference from a month to month, does that have to go to somebody? Or is it $5,000? And if it's $5,000, who's it go to? So again, having that information at the beginning, and again, it's part of the as PMI would call it, the project plan, not the project schedule, but the project plan, is to have decision matrix
Right.
that captures all that. Scope, I like to look at scope as not as creep. I look at it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to say, I know more today than I did yesterday.
Okay.
And so that's one of the mindset changes I put in. So one of my projects was 2 years behind that I walked into. Was 2 years behind, deliverables, just in really sad shape. I got brought in. They said, you fix this. And I said, great. We can't do anything we've done before. After much conversation, what I found out was all the assumptions that were made 2 years ago were gone. They've been, put by the wayside, but nothing replaced them. So we spent some time to capture what the current assumptions were, and then and I was told to make this a fun effort, which project management and fun don't always meet.
Together.
I realized that there was a lot of change going on. There was a lot of fingers in the pot. This was a huge program, $4 million, but a huge effect on the state of Washington, and was going to be backed up by a $4 billion program right behind it. So they really needed to have good change hygiene, I think is a nice way of saying it. And we did a poster series called Got Change, sort of like, for those of you old enough to know about Got Milk. And I'm looking at you guys, and you probably don't know Got Milk, but there was the dairy
No,
industry.
we do. We do.
Okay.
We're not that young, Mark, but thank you. I
We're not that
appreciate
young.
But anyway, we went around, and I found what font the Dairy Council used for that promotion, and I did these posters, and I handed it to my primary contact in the program, and she's like, "You made it fun." I said, "Absolutely," and she literally turned around, reduced it down to 5x7, and plastered them with tape on everybody's monitor, and said, "You need to think about this every single day. Every single day, you need to think about what change is happening." And then there was a document that came in behind it that had some of those decision management framework stuff that said, if your dollar changes this much, you have to put in a change request. If your scope assumption changes, you have to put in a change request. We set up a SharePoint site that people could automatically go in and automate to put in a change request. So there was no paper, right?
Right.
It was changing the mindset to one of, don't hide the fact that things are changing, which is what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
This is to say,
But
no, let's celebrate opportunity to communicate what the reality is now. Go ahead.
So, but a lot of what you're talking about is governance, basically. You're deciding how we're going to run the project. But when we think about scope creep, or in this case, you're saying we tied it to the assumptions, or we didn't plan for that, it could be opportunity, right?
Right.
I want to go back to, because again, from a strategic mindset for the project managers who are listening to this, right?
Yep.
How are you framing that in terms of business impact? How are you narrating that story to, even if there is a change request, to call these risks out, to call this new scope creep out or assumptions out, right? And framing that to drive decisions forward, because that's really what we have to do. So how do you explain that in front of the steerco or the leadership or the sponsors or whoever you're talking to then drive that decision forward? Because you can raise it all you want with governance, but you have to get a decision to be made, and to not be seen as tactical, you have to tie it to business impact. So how do you do that, or how have you done that?
Yeah. Again, it's another, and I'll use the mindset word again. It's another mindset. And I know not everyone likes these words, so I'm just going to throw it out there. But one of the things I adopted was a yes and mentality.
Okay.
It was, instead of being the PMs that always said no, right? So people stopped putting in change requests when you start knowing them. They'll go off and do whatever the heck they want to do, and you'll find out after you get the bill or when things go bad. So I had to change the mindset again to say change is good, right? We are going to evaluate, and we had an evaluation process that we automated through our SharePoint site that went in and said, and I was the first person that got all these, just so I could, one, keep an eye on the process, but two, I could do a bit of evaluating up ahead and go, yeah, they're using the system the way they need to, number one, but also they're capturing what we need to do, or I can push back and say, hey, can you update the change request? So when we had these change requests come in, the expectation was that we would not say no to something, is that we would say yes, and here are the implications. Here are the trade-offs.
Right. Let's get to that right there, Mark, because we've gotten a few comments in the chat. Trade-offs. Give us examples in which trade-offs happen, because there was a specific question: when scope creep happens, when a scope is requested to change, does the delivery date change? Does the resources change? Can you tell us all of the different trade-offs you've had to propose to the steerco? Give us a little bit more concrete examples.
Yeah, some examples.
I will tell you one of the first times I called myself a project manager. I didn't have the title, but I felt like I was the PM for the first time. I was implementing a new computer system at a hospital. This is back when it was black and white tubes. There was no PCs. This was the old days. And the old system did very little for us, and the equipment was no longer supported. So our timeline for this project to implement a new system was critical. We were affecting patient care at a certain point.
Okay.
And when we were going great guns, we had gone through the selection process, we were doing implementation, and 2 months before go live, I brought the vendor in and I said, I need you to audit my system. I want to make sure that everything is locked tight. One of the vendor people came to me. It was a friend of mine at that point and said, Mark, you have a problem. One of your modules is broke and I can't fix it. It has to be restarted. The whole implementation for that one system. Oh, and by the way, it's one of 2 areas within the hospital that is computerized right now. I knew at that moment that I had a choice. We had a choice. We could either delay the go live and take the time to properly fix it, or out of the box thinking here, we could put them into a downtime procedure during the period that we needed to rebuild their system, which, by the way, by the time we had discussions done, was going to be close to 2 months. It was a month and a half because we had to hit a financial cycle.
So I want to pause you there for a moment, because this is going to tie all back to the concept of dependencies that we were talking about. Yeah. When you are making trade-off propositions, you have to look at different time horizons. You have to look at the short term, the long term, and the different stakeholders that are involved in projects. That includes the upstream and the downstream dependencies, the legacy systems that are being monitored by support systems, the integrations, the training and the change management piece, making sure that all aligns to the operational readiness. So in your example, specifically, if we're looking to delay go live, we need to determine what are the implications, how much costs are going to be associated with additional work, or how much risk is going to be if we keep to the current go live, knowing what we know now. And those trade-offs have to be proposed to the business decision makers. For the business decision makers are the only ones who can make the final call on projects. We as project managers or leaders, we can propose based on recommendations of talking to subject matter experts or our personal expertise, but without them, the business can still override us. All we're doing is providing timely information. And these trade-offs include, should we add more resources to accelerate timelines, and that will increase costs, knowing that our budget is going to be overshot? Is the trade-off enough that it's going to reduce our liability, or is there going to be an increasing or a decreasing quality? And so that's one example that comes to mind. Another trade-off that probably to your point is, if we delay go live, how much of that is going to impact not just costs for additional labor, but the opportunity costs that were related to when we could have gone live for a particular product or service. And those are the types of things that project managers have to move away from managing tasks over to managing the strategic line of a project, which is looking in different time horizons and different venues for different people.
And looking across not just the time horizons. When we think about upstream and downstream, we're looking at when we have 2 levels where we're deep diving as project managers, looking into the tasks and times and things like that. And then we think big picture. And like one of the biggest big picture things that I think you flagged, which goes to business impact, because if you're presenting this to the team, like Justin just said, right, and you're mentioning the time horizons or the risk or the cost, how do we want to handle this? The piece that you said that stuck in my head was the risk to your project was you were risking healthcare for patients, right? That's that massive impact, which means if that gets brought up, that, I mean, technically it's not revenue, so to speak, but that is, I mean, it's a customer experience, right? That is 100% a business impact, especially when it's healthcare, right? So if you're coming, that's how I would go to them. It's like, here are the risks, but look, you are risking human life right now, right? That is our customers. It is our brand. So we need to drive this decision forward now. These are your options: the cost, the time, the human, the team, right? That's what we want to hear from that trade-off, and that's how we get out of the tactical, right? And we're now we're tying it to the big picture, to the leaders, and going, you are costing something huge if we don't drive this decision forward right now.
Right. And it is one of the reasons I have spent most of my career in healthcare, is because I knew what the impact was. I used to share with people, even if I was 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees away from direct patient care, I had an impact on a patient. When you have a project where in the documentation, in the business case, you say, if I implement this, I will save 12 lives a year. That's a KPI that strikes you. If you say, if you can tie it back, right? And again, it's not. And again, I think it gave me a really different perspective as a project manager. It wasn't widgets, right? It wasn't technology. This was the things that I've worked on that I'm the most proud of were, yes, a technical project, but the goals were clinical care. They were ultimately going to make people's lives better yet save lives. Because again, one of the business cases I wrote was a request for $300,000 to stand up a clinic that, based upon the calculations and research I did, was going to save $17 million a year in lawsuits and 12 deaths a year.
There it is. Yes. There's exactly quantifiable metrics when you're talking about trade-offs, and that's perfect. And that shows that, Mark, for example, for you in your industry, that's life and death. That's not always going to be the case for other project managers. Maybe that's just going to be a deployment delay and then some revenue costs. But I want to get to something that was raised by Chelsea in the chat. And I know this is going to be an interesting way for me to layer this for you, Chelsea. But when you're switching to that tactical to strategic, you have a situation in which you're feeling imposter syndrome sometimes of trying to raise concerns or trade-offs with the business. How do you combat that? How do you combat that mindset or that second guessing in order from when you're a junior in the project management space? And even if you're a senior, Mark, I would love to hear some advice here.
The imposter piece ultimately is fear. Right? So the question is not how do you get out of the imposter syndrome, is how do you get past the fear? And it could be a matter of having the right numbers to provide to leadership. It could be having the right words to talk to leadership with. So it's getting yourself past that fear and saying, what information can I provide to help those people that are making decisions make the best decision, right? So it's because I am the number one imposter syndrome dude, right? When I was a senior PM and this place said, yeah, we want you to be the manager, I was like, no, it's not me, and I'd been a manager and I was like, I don't feel like I'm a good one. And that wasn't the feedback I ever got, but my own selves. When they told me they wanted me to be a director, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Me? Right? But what I had realized, and what my manager, and he is a good friend of mine now, told me, he said, Mark, you've been demonstrating that all along. Whether you had a title or not, before you were the PMO manager, you were mentoring the other project managers. You were helping us with process changes. You were doing those tactical things that we needed to have done and nobody else was doing it. When we needed to have the PMO be a strategic part of our technology implementations and our business implementations, you were already doing those things. So and again, it was fear that I was that. Don't give me that title, right? So, but it was because I had been giving him information. When he said, "Why aren't you getting all these projects done?" I said, "Well, one, we don't do any portfolio management, so I don't even have data for that. Can we at least implement portfolio management?" Once I had portfolio management, I started giving him data, and he goes, "This is actionable. This is something I can do because you did it. I'm not asking you to go to the steerco. I'm going to represent us because you've given me the information I need." But I had to get past myself, past my fear. For me, again, without getting all EQE and heady here, I realized that my fear was based on certain things, and for me to have something that was stronger than fear, and I found out it was my integrity. And my integrity is not to be touched, right? If I'm going in and saying we have a problem, I need to be taken seriously because I believe in my integrity that this is the problem, right? And if you say you don't want to do it, I got to be okay with that. But for myself and for my professionalism, my being a craftsman, this is what I had to do. I hope that
I love
answers
that.
the question.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's important to know. And then we have a bunch of questions in the chat that I'm going to start scrolling to before we get to the next topic. But I think it's great to know you're not alone with imposter syndrome. I feel it all the time. I mean, I'm building my own business, right? Justin's building me. There's nothing more than imposter syndrome. We're like, can I build this, right? Like it's something everyone feels at some point, and there's a way to work through it. But you're right, it is fear, and sometimes we have to take baby steps, and sometimes we have to jump in. A lot of times we basically discount ourselves for what we're actually capable of. So do know you're not alone with that. We have a couple of questions. Oh, go ahead.
I just
Go ahead,
want to
Justin.
tie that last piece, what Mark said, which is around that value and integrity piece. If you are focused on doing the right thing for the business in the long run, then you should not worry about the imposter syndrome. Raise the concern. Be factual. Don't embellish it, but just focus on the greater concept of acting in good faith. Go ahead, E.
Yeah. So I guess since we're talking about value, I'll jump to this one. I see there's some other questions above it, so we'll get to those. But Ollie has asked how can they facilitate the post-project value chain activities for transforming the project outputs into benefits and maximizing the value? And that goes back to our business advocacy. How do we drive value?
So I'm gonna. Unfortunately, it's really tiny print. So the fact that it says post-project value chain goes back to where we started. That value chain starts at the beginning. It should not be a task at the end. The task at the end is true closure, right? From the beginning, you are working towards that vision. You are working towards the documented, agreed upon success criteria, KPIs, whatever it is, right? The business solution. Why are you, I ask why a lot as a project manager, right? And besides the yes and being known for that, I got known for asking a lot of whys. Because, and again, it actually helped in for future meetings where people would just go, Mark's going to ask me why, I better have that ready. But honestly, if you've got this, if you're starting from this point, if you have that information, you're going to build out your initial work breakdown structure based upon those, right? So you're not going to lose that. It shouldn't end up somewhere. You've got change control. You should be updating your WBS as necessary, updating your schedule, updating your plans. so it's not a it's not something I see as post-project value chain. It's really building it up to begin with. And if at all possible, you have metrics throughout, right? It's just not the task is done, but have we built some value, right? For those of us that took our PMP long enough ago, where everything was focused on being a construction PM. Interestingly enough, no, I'm serious. It was not IT. It was not IT focused. It was construction based. Half of my questions on my PMP were earned value management, which I never in a million years thought I would ever use in an IT project. I did. But it was I'll use that mindset word again. We had a very large program. They had no idea what they were doing. People were putting in percent completes into the plan. And I'd ask, how do you know this? Oh, you don't know. And we went and we actually created a framework to say, you know what, if you have your requirements, whatever size project it is within the program, you get 10%. It's 0 and 10. If you're not done, it's 0. If your requirements are signed off, it's 10%. Right?
I love that's what I do too. I'm like, it's either 0 or 100. It's not both. But so okay, so let's.
But those are metrics, right? That we can be building, right? Our training activities, what I like to call operationalization.
Yeah, that's it right there.
Right. My operationalization efforts, I'm going to have metrics. It's like how many people have been trained, how much of our communication has gone out, what have we done in terms of a feedback loop that says yes, people are getting it, people are getting excited, people are ready, right? Our readiness, right? Those are all things I'm measuring throughout the project. It's just not, is my tasks done? It's not percent complete, because percent complete by itself, it's spitting in the wind.
Right. But Mark, I think the question that Ali is getting here is, after a project is closed, how do we make sure that we measure the benefits and maximize value? And for my perspective, that's no longer in the project manager's hands. It goes back to the business and it becomes a support project. All of the activities that you're saying, which is aligning towards measuring the impact and the metrics towards the closure of the project, the stabilization of the project, to make sure that the adoption is there for stickiness in the long run. But the measurement afterwards, that's tracked somewhere else.
I think it really does depend. Number one, it depends if it's part of a program. A lot of times my program management has had a component of project management, portfolio management, and both pre and post efforts, where, and in fact, we've actually had within my program plan have had operational efforts in there for the systems that had already gone live before the whole program was complete. So we didn't relinquish, as a program, we didn't relinquish the onus for that operational effort. We shared it with the business until it was turned over. So it depends. I think, and I guess what else, am I missing on Ollie's question? I apologize.
No. I think Elizabeth will put the next question. So I think that answers it. There is a depends component after a project closes, and somewhere a project manager has visibility or not.
Correct.
Yep. And we do another question. Let me share this. So we're going back a little bit. Prashant had asked a question a little while ago about, because we were talking about governance. We got into that, right? And he had asked the difference between a PMO and program or project governance, if there is a difference, right? And is the PMO more about directing processes and governance, is that enforcement or not? So kind of what is the difference between project program governance and then the PMO oversight?
I'm going to answer with the least favorite answer anyone can give you, and that's depends.
It does.
Right?
It does.
Because it's what is the need of the organization, right? When I stood up, the PMO I was talking about, where I was PM manager and then director, it was in the bowels, right? It was in sad shape. Maturity level 0 or -2, depending on how you looked at it. So I had to rebuild it, and I had to rebuild the trust and everything else. And I knew that the organization would only accept so much governance. And I also don't use, it's a G word I don't use. It's another reason I use the decision management framework.
Okay.
Yes, it is governance, but people, again, these people didn't want PMO, they didn't want governance, they don't want templates, they don't want standards. It was, what did they need? What was important to them? So specifically to this question is, there are some organizations where the PMO can be the guiding light, right? And say, this is how you should do it. In fact, one of my favorite things to have done is implement PM for non-PMs in an organization where we had a lot of shadow projects in business units. And I said, it's great, you guys are doing your own projects. You're still going to come under the auspices of us as the PMO, as the center of excellence, that this is how you do a project, right? Even if you're doing it yourself, there are certain things you're going to do. Everything you do as a project is going to have a charter. I don't care, right? And I got leadership to buy off on that.
Not everyone uses a project charter. I'm giving it to you. We're giving it to you. Keep going. I want to add to this, because my bread and butter is governance. So
I know, but again, it's the underlying answer here is, the reason it depends is because of what the organization needs. Right. If the organization needs to have a all-knowing, all-seeing, all-doing PMO, that's great. But I've also been in organizations that have an enterprise PMO, an IT PMO, and then program PMOs. In fact, I got brought in as the lead in a program level PMO. And I was like, where's the standards, right? What are we going to,
Here.
Are we using IT's governance? Are we using the enterprise's governance? No. You're in a special place. That your program is so special, you don't have to go by any of those rules.
Right. So, and I think, Mark, this gets to a point where it depends is around organizational maturity.
Absolutely.
And all of the different organizational culture that's in place, if they have a more trusting and they can do a centralized PMO. But the governance piece, this strategy and governance, these are the two things I harp on. But why governance is so important for moving from an executor to a business partner is around building robust processes and frameworks to help address changes in business context.
Sure.
When you're focused on just task orientation, you're not going to be able to handle it proactively enough. That's why a prioritization rubric is important. That's why a decision-making framework is important. That's why a concept of a RACI is important. I didn't say a RACI, I said a concept of it.
Well, you also saw me laugh. You laughed when you said prioritization rubrics. I hate that term too. I saw it on your face.
But yes. But the thing is, again, I walked into that situation and I said, where's your portfolio management? Well, we don't have that. We even have a master list of all the projects. Yeah, we tried that. Tried what? Did you put any kind of criteria behind that portfolio? Yeah, we tried the T-shirt sizing. That was my favorite comment in a meeting, right? And I said, define T-shirt sizes. Well, small, medium, large, extra large, 2XL. No, I said, I get the reference to T-shirts. I said, what was the criteria for an XL?
I like whoosh.
Let's clarify that. Let's clarify that for the audience, though. Is
what
like
when
I T-shirt
mean?
size. Correct. When I t-shirt size, I only look at the duration. I don't look at full level of effort, because t-shirt sizing, you probably don't have all the requirements yet, but a small might be 2 weeks, a medium might be 4. It is subjective, but here's the key. The key is you decide with your team ahead of time what the definition
And you
of that
consistent.
t-shirt size is. So then
Yes.
there's consistency, and you know what you're working against. And that should be documented where you're doing that, because everyone will ask over and over and over again.
Yes.
I had to stop and be like, let's
Level of
explain that.
effort,
But yeah.
duration, resource count, complexity of a there's so many different variations.
There's
in
so
what
many different
this
ways to do it. Yeah.
My portfolio spreadsheet literally had 30 columns in it, right? I mean, it was, it was different perspectives. I had what the CEO thought things were versus what the sponsor thought it was, right?
Yeah. Well, this goes to, and this goes to something, and we're running out of time, so we're not going to get into it too much, but just to speak to, because, and Justin and I will hit on this at some point. We actually argued about it last weekend. But it goes to when you're t-shirt sizing, yes, we do debate, when we're t-shirt sizing, when we're planning, you need to have the right people in the room. When you just said a sponsor or a leader says that, it is the worst thing in the world, and it happens all the time when someone puts their finger in the air and says, this is $1 million, we're going to have it done in 8 months. No, where is the validation from the teams? So you bringing your teams into these discussions is quite helpful.
So I want to kind
go
of
ahead.
tie things together here, Mark.
Please.
We didn't get to talk about all of the different facets here, but when we come to the piece of being a tactician, if you will, versus becoming a strategist in project management, we have to look at different lenses.
Yep.
One of the ones that we talked about was around business understanding, and that's tying things towards business outcomes. A second component is around systems thinking, understanding dependencies, long-term and short-term horizons. And another one that we talked about was just around stoicism or just emotional regulation. We touched on it briefly with the impostor syndrome, which is when you're moving further into project management and getting to that strategic component, you're not just thinking about a project tasks or yourself as a project manager, but the entire collective stakeholder group, and being able to influence people, knowing that emotions will run hot and cold all the way through. That's enough of me talking. If you would add a little bit more to the concepts that we're talking through here, what other takeaways can you recommend or that people should keep in mind when they're trying to transition to that piece of that business partnership?
When it comes down to, I think that the bottom line is know that we're all human. Understand we all come in with our biases. We all come in with our histories. We all come in with our doubts and our foibles and our positives. And if you can meet people that way, meet them at who they are, right? My again, without going to a story, my favorite dealing with a terrible sponsor story came down to taking the guy for lunch. And because we were at loggerheads, and it wasn't until I took him to lunch, found out about his childhood. We didn't talk about the project. We talked about his childhood, and he told me how he grew up and what his dad did and all these things. And all of a sudden, I understood him better and what his biases were, and he saw me as a human at the same time because I cared, and it made the future problems that came up a little bit easier. He was still a problematic sponsor, but we got through them. We were able to have the crucial conversations of saying, you talk about business trade-offs. I walked into this guy's office with a contract, and I said, "This is my job as your project manager. You will agree to this contract, or you will not have a project manager." Now, had I not had that relationship, had I not met him at a human level, he would have kicked me out of his office. Instead, he said, "Mark, sit down. Let's talk about this."
And that's a perfect.
I love that. It's a perfect way to end. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, where can we find you, and where can people look for more of your information or lessons?
I am solely on LinkedIn, and I am one of only, I think, maybe 2 Mark Rosners in the world. And the other guy's dead. So, no, MarkRozner, not ROSNER. I would offer everyone to reach out. I'm very much open to connection. If people have other questions, we didn't mention the fact that I'm actually here in Turkey. So I'm I'm a little far away, but I'm also semi-retired, and I volunteer my time to folks that have these kinds of questions. So if people want to reach out, happy to get the connection requests. Happy to, if you can quantify what you need your help with, or just to say, hey, I don't know what I need. I'm happy to set up coffee chats as well.
Now, Mark, I know
That's
you're a
awesome.
mentor. You also mentioned you have a book?
I was part of a book last year. John Connolly, another fellow project manager, brought 10 of us together and challenged us to write a chapter with the idea that if we had 1 hour to spend with a new PM or a PM that's thinking of changing what they're doing, what would you say? I am the 10th chapter. I think it was purposeful. The chapter ahead of mine is all about EQ and project management. I brought in a personal level, as I am known to do now and again, where I talk about where my EQ came from, how I built my EQ, and then how I directly applied it to project management.
Perfect.
And being a leader.
Thanks,
It's
Mark.
called Executing Excellence. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
Can you go ahead and put that link after in the comments? That would be great. I already shared your LinkedIn profile. Please, but definitely share that. People will be thrilled to get your value. You've been so incredible today. We will be back live on December 5th with Elias Cobb again. In the meantime, you can find us across social media and our podcast as well through Apple and Spotify and a few others. We will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for everyone for welcoming us into your homes and offices today. Mark, thank you for joining us so much. We really appreciate it.
Bye, folks.